Hello and welcome to Samuel's Fortress. I'm your host Kirill, and today we're going to be discussing the Second Serbian Uprising. Now, in the previous video, I discussed the First Serbian Uprising, which was launched in 1804 under the leadership of George Petrovic, also known as Karađorđe, and the other Serbian knyazes who were under his leadership. Now, in that video, I pretty much neglected entirely Karađorđe's background, who he was, how he got to his position, who the other Serbian knyazes were, how they got to where they were at that time. So I kind of want to go back and kind of lay some more groundwork on who this new Serbian class of nobility is, how they got there, and so forth. So if we rewind a little bit to the late 18th century into the early 19th century, what we see during this time period is the Austrian Empire is experiencing an increased demand for certain agricultural goods, in particular pork. What this does is it greatly increases the wealth of Serbian pig farmers who up until this point were very poor peasants. However, like I said, as a result of this Austrian demand for their products, we see a great increase in trade from Serbia into Austria, and these formerly poverty-stricken pig farmers now see an explosion in their wealth, and a new merchant class is created within Serbian society. Now, a lot of these newly rich merchants, including Karađorđe, will find themselves in positions of leadership. Basically, they will be the new knyazes or these local chieftains within Serbian society. And Karađorđe, like I alluded to in the previous video, is elected the leader of the knyazes or the Oberknyaz. However, as this new kind of nobility, if you will, this petty nobility amongst the early modern Serbs is established, we see a tension between Karađorđe and the other knyazes due to the power dynamic between him and the regional leaders. Basically, what these local knyazes are fearful of is the over-centralization of power under Karađorđe. Basically, they fear losing their local prestige, their local power within their respective administrative zones, if you will. They fear this very much, and therefore a kind of civil war, if you will break out between Karađorđe and the other knyazes. And here I will be quoting Misha Gleni's The Balkans in that regard, and I will be referencing this work throughout the video. Although the Serbs had a large number of men under arms, these were organized in strong regional units whose primary loyalty lay with their local knyazes. The strong men did not challenge Karađorđe's position as supreme military commander, but from the beginning they resisted his attempts to centralize political and economic power. Jakov Nenadović, who had replaced his brother Aleksandar as Valjevo knez following the latter's murder by Mehmed Aga Fočić, told Karađorđe that he was not welcome in western Serbia. Eventually, in 1810, his four main rivals organized a conspiracy, and in the same year, Milenko Stojković, who ran both eastern Serbia and had an extensive harem, organized a rebellion against Karađorđe. Although no rebellion succeeded during the First Serbian Uprising, Karađorđe never felt safe. None of the Serb leaders was illiterate, and their arguments frequently ended in shooting matches. Karađorđe himself had a terrifying reputation. He justified the warning he issued at the time of his elections in Orošac, executing among others his own stepfather and brother, whose bodies were left hanging in front of Karađorđe's house as an unambiguous reminder to others. Behind the drama of intrigue, shootouts, and murder lay a serious struggle concerning the constitutional nature of the Serbian proto-state. Karađorđe wanted to establish a system of monarchical centralism, while his baronial opponents were fighting for an oligarchy in which each leader would reign supreme in his own locality. A third, weaker force was made up of tradesmen and intellectuals from Vojvodina in the Habsburg Empire. They argued for an independent judiciary and other institutions to curb the power of both Karađorđe and the regional commanders. The modernizing influence of the Vojvodina Serbs was restricted to the town of Belgrade, where their brightest intellectual, Dositej Obradović, a writer and intellectualist, founded the first Serbian high school in 1808. Karađorđe made sure, however, that their political influence was strictly limited. This was not only because the indigenous Serbs were uninterested in the revolutionary ideas of the Enlightenment fostered by Obradović and his compatriots, the Vojvodina Serbs often alienated the other Serbs of the Pashaluk who were risking their lives in an armed conflict and had little time for the theorizing intellectuals. As one of the most important writers in the Balkans has described, the Trans-Riparian Serbs regarded themselves as distinguished bearers of Western culture, destined to administer the illiterate, half-savage barbarians of the Principality. Dress, language, and outlook divided them from the native Serbs. The new quote-unquote men of the pen looked down upon agriculture and manual labor, demurred against teaching their sons a craft or marrying their daughters to a craftsman, and for several years wore German clothes instead of Serbian national dress. Instead of the thee and thou in the homespun manner of the Principality, they employed the German habit, ridiculous sounding to the Serbian ears, of addressing each other in the third person. Finally, they refused to call the Serbians brother in the customary fashion of the patriarchal society of Serbia. While these two camps within the new Serbian nobility are fighting amongst each other, the Karađorđe camp seeking centralization and the other knezes fighting for a decentralized state where they have local control over their administrative regions. While this is going on, both sides are also getting extremely wealthy at the expense of the Serbian peasantry, who continue to be exploited the same way they were under the Turkish pashas. Here Glenny writes, "The peasantry began to view the squabbling knezes with contempt as having merely usurped the function of the dahi. The new elite adopted the dress style of the Turks, donning embroidered green silk and wearing turbans, and extracting profits just as their Turkish predecessors had." So now let's fast forward back to the year 1813. At this point of time, the first Serbian uprising has ended. It has ended in a defeat for the Serbs, and their leader, Karađorđe, will be forced to flee Serbia, first into Austria, then finally making his way into the Russian Empire, where he will take refuge in the region of Bessarabia. Now, back in Serbia, we will see one of the local knezes, a Miloš Obrenović, take the place of Karađorđe as supreme knez, or the leader of the Serbs. Obrenović, like Karađorđe, according to Misha Glenny, is an illiterate pig farmer who has an intense rivalry with Karađorđe. Obrenović and his family, and Karađorđe and his family do not get along at all. In fact, Karađorđe is suspected as being responsible for the murder of Miloš Obrenović's brother Milan. So these men do not have a good relationship at all. However, due to Karađorđe's exile, like I said, it is Miloš Obrenović who will fill the vacuum and take control in Serbia. Now, after the first uprising, like we discussed in the previous video, there will be pretty brutal reprisals against the Serbs at the hands of the Ottoman forces, who have reestablished control over the Belgrade Pashaluk. And due to these reprisals and brutality at the hands of the Turks, the Serbs will launch a second uprising in the beginning of 1815, less than 2 years after the end of the first uprising, and it will be Miloš Obrenović who will lead the second Serbian uprising. Although both these men, Obrenović and Karađorđe, are personal rivals, they do have the same political goals. Basically, both men reject this form of decentralized Serbian rule, and both of them wish to establish a Serbian state under the rule of a single man, of a new monarchy, and so forth. Obviously, they disagree on who that monarch should be, but nevertheless, that is the structure that they wish the new Serbian state to take. And that is the goal that Obrenović has going into the second uprising, is to establish a Serbian state under his leadership. Now, Obrenović does have has different tactics than Karađorđe. He kind of opposes the kind of direct warfare with the Ottoman Empire that Karađorđe took during the first uprising. Obrenović sees this as a foolish move, and he takes a more a more indirect tactic in regards to his uprising in order to establish a Serbian state under his command. Basically, what Obrenović seeks to do here is engage the Ottomans briefly in order to demonstrate his strength, but then quickly bring hostilities back down and begin negotiations with the Sultan in order to establish a legitimacy that is sponsored by the Ottoman authorities. In 1814, assuming that Serbian resistance had been broken, Selim III's successor as Sultan, Mahmud II, withdrew most of his army from the Pashaluk. Miloš took advantage of this to launch a new uprising in the spring of 1815, and soon the chieftains controlled most of the Pashaluk. Miloš had learned the important lessons from the course of the first uprising. His political ambition was identical to Karađorđe's. He sought absolute power over all other Serbs in the Belgrade Pashaluk, but his tactics were very different. In contrast to Karađorđe, he made every effort to avoid sustained military confrontation with the Ottoman armies, putting all his energy into striking a bargain with Istanbul. The agreement reached with the Porte in October of 1815 guaranteed Miloš's preeminence in Serbia in exchange for loyalty to the Porte. Any attempt by other Serbian chieftains to unseat Miloš was henceforth to be seen as an attack on the Sultan himself. By 1817, these negotiations between Miloš Obrenović and the Sultan Mahmud II will come to an end in an agreement that is favorable to both sides. Basically, what this means is that Serbia will be granted the status of a principality, and Miloš Obrenović will be granted the title of prince. Now, this Serbian principality is still very much under Ottoman control. The Principality of Serbia will not gain any real independence until 1878 with the Treaty of Berlin. But nevertheless, the Serbs are granted a great deal of authority within their respective territory as a result of these negotiations. Basically, the Serbian officials will be allowed to tax the Serbian peasantry directly without interference from the Ottoman officials, without direct influence or involvement from Istanbul. Additionally, Janissaries will be expelled from the Serbian principality, and the Ottoman officials within the principality will be confined only to a few cities. Additionally, Serbian merchants will be given free access to the empire's markets, and Serbs will be given the right to bear arms. Now, although these freedoms are granted to the Serbs, the Serbian peasantry still isn't in a great position, as it is now under the rule of Obrenović, who does continue to exploit the peasantry quite heavily. Obrenović's influence and wealth will increase dramatically in the years following the Second Serbian Uprising. The great loser in Miloš's dazzling diplomatic game was the Serbian peasantry. Although Obrenović's rule restored order throughout the province, he was more systematic in his economic exploitation of the Serbs than the Ottomans had ever been. His reign, which lasted until his abdication in 1839, was punctuated by rebellions. At first, these were organized by jealous chieftains like Karađorđe, but increasingly they attracted the support of the peasantry. The latter rose against Miloš for the first time under the leadership not of a chieftain, but of a traitor, Miloje Popović Đak. Đak's rebellion was a massive demonstration of peasant opposition to the new order that they detested. The Serbs were discovering that the rule of their own leaders did not in itself bring liberty and well-being. Đak's followers also discovered how weak a popular uprising could be when confronted by the organized power of a centralized state. Nor was the lesson lost on Miloš. As a result of the rebellion, he devoted more effort than ever to the organization of a standing army and a larger state apparatus. Besides the Serbian peasantry, who certainly did not appreciate the exploitative governorship of the Serbian principality under Miloš Obrenović, there were also more radical political forces, both within the Serbian principality and abroad, who did not like Miloš Obrenović's relationship with the Sultan. Basically, there are more, like I said, radical revolutionary forces, such as the Feliki Eteria, the Society of Friends, a Greek nationalist revolutionary organization, which is opposed to these collaborationist regimes such as Obrenović's, and wish to launch, like I said, these more revolutionary style uprisings, more similar to the first Serbian uprising, that will overthrow the authority of Istanbul in the Balkans and in the Serbian principality. So what occurs is during Obrenović's consolidation of power, the Society of Friends will collaborate with Karađorđe, who is, like I said, in exile in the Russian Empire, and they will attempt to bring Karađorđe back into Serbia to launch a coup against Miloš Obrenović and to renew the revolutionary struggle against the Sultan in Istanbul. Now, unfortunately for the Society of Friends and for Karađorđe, when Karađorđe tries to sneak back into Serbia in the summer of 1817, following the conclusion of the negotiations between Obrenović and the Sultan, he is discovered by Serbian forces and he is executed. Basically, Miloš Obrenović has informants, spies that are close to Karađorđe, who know about his return and his attempt to overthrow the rule of Obrenović. So, like I said, he will be captured upon his return and he will be killed. In order to demonstrate his loyalty to the Sultan, Obrenović orders that Karađorđe's head be removed, and the head is sent to the Ottomans as a gift. In 1817, Karađorđe returned to Serbia in secret. His presence was betrayed to Miloš, who ordered his execution and then sent his rival's head to the Sultan to demonstrate his obeisance. The incident is often cited as an example of the Serbs' fratricidal barbarity, but this interpretation obscures the cold political calculations behind Miloš's actions. Karađorđe was sent to Serbia as an agent of the Filiki Eteria, or the Society of Friends, the Greek revolutionary organization that aimed to destabilize Ottoman Europe in preparation for an armed rebellion. Karađorđe's presence not only threatened the internal stability of the Pashaluk, but his role as a friendly society agent could have undermined the entire basis upon which Miloš was building an independent Serbia, in agreement with his unwitting partner, the Sultan himself. For Miloš was engaged in a complex and clever game. He was steadily chipping away at the foundations of Ottoman power in Serbia by making Istanbul even more dependent on him economically. By the agreement of October 1815, large parts of the administration of the territory were handed over to Miloš. He used his control of the Serbian economy to buy further political and economic concessions from Istanbul. Within a decade, he had become the largest livestock exporter in the province, using his political power to guarantee a virtual monopoly on the trade. He raked off vast sums from the population, having bought the rights of all tax revenue in exchange for a paltry annual tribute to the Sultan. As Miloš became richer, the Porte engaged in debilitating wars, first against the rebellious Greeks and then against Russia, turned to him with ever greater frequency for financial help. By 1830, he bought the right to hereditary rule for his family in perpetuity, an important step forward in the struggle for independence, and an even more important step forward for the Obrenović family. When he came to power in 1815, Miloš didn't have two pennies to rub together. As Vuk Karadžić noted in 1832, he had enriched himself to such a degree that he could pay the Sultan a ton of sovereigns for his hereditary principle, build palaces all over Serbia, and live like some god on earth. He had become one of the wealthiest men in Europe. Now, one may look back and wonder whether this entire revolutionary period in Serbia, the first uprising under Karađorđe or the second uprising under Obrenović, were of any actual benefit to the Serbian people. Certainly from the perspective of the Serbian peasantry, not much was gained as a result of these uprisings. At the end of the day, all they've managed to do is trade Ottoman lords for Serbian lords, on top of the countless dead Serbian soldiers, and the dead Serbian civilians who perished as a result of Ottoman reprisals. The Serbian peasants remain back under economic exploitation. Like I said, this time it is simply under Serbian exploitation as opposed to Turkish exploitation. The rule of Miloš Obrenović is no better than that of his Ottoman predecessors. In fact, Miloš Obrenović is often referred to as a Serbian pasha. So from a purely material perspective, from the perspective of the Serbian peasantry, you're going to have a hard time arguing that this entire Serbian revolution was beneficial to them. However, that being said, if we step back and look at this entire period through a historical lens, we see that the Serbian Revolution, the two uprisings, was extremely important to the formation of the modern Serbian state. The Principality of Serbia, which resulted from the second uprising, will eventually, like I said, gain its independence from the Ottoman Empire in the late 19th century through the Treaty of Berlin. That Serbian Principality will eventually evolve into the Kingdom of Serbia, and that Kingdom of Serbia will eventually gain a great deal of Balkan territory under the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. So from that aspect, the Serbian uprisings were crucial in the formation of the modern Serbian state. Now, as the Serbian state grows throughout the 19th century, it will come into conflict with other growing powers in the Balkans, namely Bulgaria. And eventually, these two powers that are emerging throughout the 19th century will come into conflict with each other at the Serbo-Bulgarian War of 1885. And that is a topic which we will be discussing in a couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that. That will be a very interesting episode of Samuel's Fortress. However, in the meantime, I will be discussing another very important event that occurs in the Balkans between the Second Serbian Uprising and the Serbo-Bulgarian War of 1885. That will be the Greek Revolution, or the Greek War of Independence, and that will be the topic of the video for next weekend. So until then, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.